Hello, hello everyone. Great to see everyone again. I feel like it's been quite a long time, although I've been watching lectures, Hayden's lectures, but I feel like I haven't met everyone for quite a long time. But great to see everyone again, and I'll be lecturing this week for the concepts around requirement engineering and also some software design concepts. And those will be the concepts that we'll need for iterations array. So after this week's lecture, after the lecture today, the lecture on this Thursday, you will have learned everything that you need for your iterations array. Cool. So let's start with the first one, which is requirement engineering. So requirement engineering and the next one, use cases and user stories, they are two of my favorite lectures in 1531. And they are also very interesting concepts in software engineering, in the whole software engineering life cycles. So before we get into what is requirement engineering, I want to show you our first lecture when we talk about the software engineering life cycle. I want to show you where requirement engineering is and when we'll use requirement engineering. So that will be, where's the figure? Yeah, here it is. So this is where we introduced the software development lifecycle, and there are requirement analysis, maintenance, deployment, testing, development, and design. So for now, in 1531, we have already talked about development, which is coding, and HTTP server. They are all about development. Testing, we have talked about dynamic verification and static verification, so they are all about testing. We also talk about deployment and maintenance. So this week we will talk about requirement analysis and design. So you will have learned the whole software engineering lifecycle. So you can see that requirement engineering is somewhere before design. So normally we start with requirement analysis to know what the users want for our application, and then we do design and then development testing and then go around the circle. So this is one important phase in software development lifecycle. Okay, now let's go back to requirements and requirement engineering. So requirement, we'll talk about like what is it, like why it is important, and how do we do requirement engineering. So why it's important? Like in the old days, before we had Agile, the traditional way of developing software is when a client came to us, software developers, and they say, well, I want to have an application for a forum. So for example, 1531 forum, I want to have a forum. And then the developer will say, okay, I know what you want. I will get that for you. Before actually listen to the client, like what they actually want the forum to be like, right? And then the developer go back home and then start coding and then develop and deployment, testing and everything. And then give this software, this application back to the client. And the client say, well, it's okay. Well, it is a forum. However, there are some requirements that I want to have for this forum. So for example, I want to have like maybe a leaderboard, or maybe I want a forum to be like easier to use and something else. So like when Agile become more and more popular, then we know like as a software developer, as a software engineer, we should listen more to the client, like what they actually want. So this is about requirements. Like before we actually code anything, we need to know how we test that, and before we code anything, we also need to know how to design it. And before we actually code or test or design anything, we need to know the objective. What is the objective? Like, what do we want to achieve with our application or with our software? So this is requirements. So this is also why requirement engineering or requirements is so important, because we need to be very clear about what is the objectives are. Okay, so that we know that we are developing something that is useful to the users and is what the clients want to see. Cool. Some conceptual, like theoretical. The definition of requirements by IEEE is a condition or capability needed by a user to solve a problem or achieve an objective. Okay, and this kind of requirements is, you can think of it as an agreement of work. So when a client comes to us, it's an agreement of what needs to be done, and we should also discuss the requirement with all stakeholders. And we should also include in this kind of agreement of some description of the proposed system and some constraints of the system. So for example, let's use the 1531 format as an example again. So the description will be like students can ask questions, tutors can answer questions, we can have discussion under the stress, and the constraints may be, for example, the user needs to log in with their ZID. Right, so they need to be a UNSW student or UNSW tutor or a lecturer. And some other constraints may be after they click submit a post, the post should be on the forum within like how many seconds. So these are all constraints of a proposed system. Right, cool. So you may wonder, like, why is this important to us as a software developer? Right. So traditionally, this kind of requirement engineering is done by a separate team rather than the software developer. So maybe the business analysis or a specific group of people who their work is to understand the user's requirement, to work with the clients, have meetings with the clients and other stakeholders to understand these requirements. And then they put these requirements in a document and give this document to the designer or the developer. And the developer, the software engineer, will focus only on like coding, developing the software. Well, like in more like modern software engineering or development environment, there's a growing need of having software engineers to be involved in this requirement engineering process to really understand what the customers, the users want, so that when they are actually designing the software or coding or developing the software, they have a very clear idea of the objective of the project. So last term we invited an industry lecturer that talked about requirement. So the lecture from the industry lecture last term was a owner of a software company. So so they mentioned that when they talk with clients, talk with stakeholders, they always had at least one software developer involved in the meeting. So they invite the software engineers, the developers to join those meetings to talk with clients, and they found that it's very helpful to meet the user's need. So this is also why this is important not only for the specific group of people doing business analysis, and it's also important for us as software engineers or developers. Cool. So now we know what is requirements. What is it by definition? But let's see some examples of requirements. So for example, chair specifications. Okay, so chair can be many different ways, right? Like some chairs, they need arms. Some chairs, they need to move. They need to have wheels, but some others don't need to have. So we need to be very clear we need to have a very clear documentation of the requirements for our software as well. So when we are writing software or generating software requirements, there are two types of requirements. One is called functional requirements, and the other one is called non-functional requirements. So functional requirements specifies what the software can do. So for example, a functional requirement can be, well, as a user, they should be able to log in to the forum, right? So this is a functional. And I can submit a question, or a user can answer a question, or the system can send notifications to the user. So these are all functional requirements, like what the system can do, what kind of feature, what kind of service the system can provide. On the other hand, there are also non-functional requirements. So non-functional requirements are constraints on the system. So for example, the system should be fast, they should be stable, they should be easy to use. So these are non-functional requirements. Okay. Cool. Let's see some examples. So for non-functional requirements, the example can be, well, the system must send a notification to all users whenever there's a new post or someone comments on an existing post, like what the system can do, right? Well, non-functional requirements is the system must send emails no later than 30 minutes after from such an activity. Cool. Let's do some quick activities. For example, there's a system that is designed to use in clinics by patients, like, for example, suffering from mental health problem, and the system should also record the details of their consultations and their conditions. Okay, so there's a system that for this purpose. Can you put in the chat some examples of functional requirements? So that I can know whether you understand what is functional requirements, and I'll provide feedback for what do you put in the chat. Cool. There are some delays, I think. I will start with my example. For example, a functional requirement can be a user should be able to search the appointment for the clinics, right? Or the staff member using the system should be able to log in with their employee number. What else? What kind of like functional requirements for such kind of clinical system or clinical application? Like what kind of this kind of application they should be able to do? Oopsie. Yep. Cool. What about non-functional requirements for the clinical application? We got an answer from the chat, like functional requirements, like users should be able to make an appointment. Perfect. So this is a very good example. And this is a functional requirement. For non-functional requirement, I will start with my examples. Like the system should be able to all clinics during normal working hours. And another example could be the system should implement patient privacy provisions. Right? Should keep the patient's information privately. Yeah, and Princess also making the chat a very good example of functional requirements as make noises when a new appointment is made, like ding ding. Yeah, there's a new appointment. This is a very good example as well. If you can think of any other non-functional requirements, please also put that in the chat. You are thinking about the non-functional requirements and functional requirements. For functional requirements, normally we'll try to set that as specific as possible because sometimes ambiguity may make what the clients want and what is implemented different. So for example, functional requirement, one may say that like a user should be able to search for the appointment for all leads. So for example, this is a functional requirement. However, the search can be defined or interpreted in many different ways, right? So for example, the user's intention may be like search for a patient name across all appointments in all clinics, or the developer's interpretation can be search for a patient name in an individual clinic. So the user chooses the clinic and then search. So when we write like functional requirements, we try to be as specific as we could, but sometimes it cannot be like perfect, right? So there will also be some kind of ambiguity, but we try to be as clear, as specific as we could. So this is also like when you are not clear about the client intention or any part of the requirement engineering. So normally the action for us is that we go back to the client, like we go back to the stakeholders and ask for clarification. So this is also for like 1531 project spec. We try to be as specific, as clear as possible, but sometimes it's like unavoidable. Like you sometimes need to be clarification as well. And this is actually a very important skill. So this is also why we ask our students, like, if there's anything that is not clear enough in the spec, go and ask on the forum, right? So this is also true in real world. Like the requirements document sometimes can be, it's very, very common. It cannot be perfect. Like sometimes it will be some ambiguity. And then for us, what we need to do is we go and ask and clarify. Cool. For non-functional requirements, there are we have seen some examples of non-functional requirements. Sometimes the non-functional requirements can be more important than the functional requirements. Why is that? Yeah. Okay, so we mentioned non-functional requirements are constraints on the system. So for example, the usability, right? The system should be easy to use. So for example, if you have a forum, like 1531 forum, users can submit questions. The tutors can answer questions, like all functional requirements are met. However, it's really hard to use. Like if you find it really hard to find where to submit a question, or how can I find the answers from the tutors. If it's too hard to use, it's like the system may not be usable, right? So you can see that sometimes non-functional requirement can be more important. Another example would be, for example, the clinic system example. Such kind of application, they need to make sure that the client's information is private. So we need to save those information privately. If this kind of non-functional requirement cannot be met, like the system cannot be used, right? So we need to keep the patient's information private, right? Privately. So these are all examples of non-functional requirements. Cool. So now we have learned what is requirements and the different types of requirements. However, where could we find this kind of requirements? Right? Requirement doesn't just appear out of air. We need to do some research. We need to talk with people. Then we can generate this kind of requirement documentations. Right? So this is the process. It's called requirement engineering. It's also an engineering process that we can identify those kind of requirements. And the process, the requirement engineering process, normally includes 4 steps, starting from elicitation, and then analysis, and then specification, and then validation. So we'll talk about them one by one. We'll start with like the general idea of requirement engineering. It's a set of activities that focusing on identifying the purpose and goal of a software system. Right. And we talk a lot about like stakeholders. So who are stakeholders? So stakeholders include users, like who will be using the system. So they are part of the stakeholders. They are impacted. The system will have impact on those end users, like how they will interact with the system. The stakeholders will also include the clients, like often business, like who ask us, like software engineering or some software teams or software companies, to design or implement such kind of software. So they are clients, like who pay for the system. And also the stakeholders will include the design team, who designed the system, and also the stakeholders also including us, like software developers. We are also stakeholders. There are also other stakeholders, like who will be indirectly impacted by the system. So for example, the clinical application, the clinical system, like the patients are also stakeholders. Like they are not end users, they are not clients, they are also not part of the design team. But their information is recorded in the system. So they are also part of stakeholders. And also like IT staff, like us, are also responsible for installing or maintaining the system. So IT staff is also stakeholders. Other stakeholders will also include medical ethics manager, like the manager who manage the ethics, ethical part of the system. So they are also stakeholders. So why we talk about who are the stakeholders is because when we do requirement engineering, we need to talk with all sorts of stakeholders. So for example, when we are designing the clinical software, the clinical system, we need to talk with the doctors who will be using the system to manage the appointment. We also need to talk with like patients, like whether they are okay with information stored in the system in the specific ways. We'll also need to talk with like medical receptionists who manage the appointments, right? We'll maybe also talk with the ethical teams, like to make sure that the system is designed to be very like ethical, like follow the ethical requirements, right? So they are all stakeholders. Okay, so after we identify the stakeholders, the next step will be we talk with them. We talk with them to understand what they need, what are the requirements for the system. And the first step will be elicitation of the raw requirements from the stakeholders. Like how do we do elicitation? Normally what we do is we talk with people. We talk with the stakeholders. For example, we can ask them questions like, how do you want to use this kind of clinical software, clinical system? Have you used any clinical management system? What are the good things of those existing systems? Do you have any challenges using the current system? So then you know what your system should be able to do and what kind of features you need to have. Right. So you have interviews with the stakeholders. You may also want to do some market research, like research into what is existing softwares in the market. Like what are the other medical management systems? Look at what they can do and then what they can't do. Right? So you may also want to have a focus group. So what is the focus group? A focus group is a group meeting. So it's like interview with a group of people. For example, you may invite some end users, invite some nurses, invite a doctor, invite like a medical reception. So you invite a group of people, and they may share different roles when using the system, and you have a meeting together with them and then have discussions with them. And then you ask questions again, like what you want to use the system for, how you want the system to be, and what are the challenges you have currently with other systems. So in this way, you can understand what the users need. Right? So this is the first step in requirement engineering. Okay. Do you have any question about the first step? Yeah. So these are all like very common ways of understanding the stakeholders' need. But there are also other ways. Like for example, you may want to do a survey. Like survey is you can use Google Doc or Microsoft Forms, and they define some questions and send the forms to stakeholders, and then they can fill in rather than you invite them in person or have online call to interview them. So sometimes the surveys can be easier because you can send to a lot of people, and they can finish the survey when they have time, like when like it can be more flexible, and you can get a large amount of data because you can send to people across the world, right? So surveys can sometimes be easier. However, the drawback of survey is all the questions are predefined, so you cannot ask following-on questions. So for example, in an interview, when a stakeholder mentions that, well, I'm currently using system A, like software A, however, I found it really hard to do blah, 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 right? And then during an interview, you can ask following questions like, why do you find it really hard to do blah, blah, blah? And they can explain why. So you understand deeper, you can get a deeper understanding of the challenges they have with current existing applications. So when you design your own system, your own application, you can try to avoid that or make it the user's experience better, right? So interviews is a better way of getting like in-depth information, like because you can ask following-on questions, and normally when they talk more, like they give examples, they talk about their experience. However, when like during surveys, they try to write very short answers, right? But the good thing about doing survey is that you can send your survey questions to a lot of people, and then you can get a lot of responses. So there's a question in the chat, like interviews have open-ended questions where surveys are closed-ended. Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Yeah, like surveys are normally closed-ended. But the good thing about surveys, as we mentioned, like we can get a large number of responses. Another good thing about doing survey is that we can get some quantitative information. So for example, we ask a question in our survey as how do you rate the importance of being able to do blah blah blah, and the participants can like take like very important, like somewhere important, like not important at all, right? And then you can collect a lot of data, and you can analyze which like how important it is to the stakeholders, right? Because you can get a lot of data and you can do some quantitative analysis. But for interviews, normally we can do very limited number of interviews because interviews normally takes time, right? And it's also hard, like more difficult to analyze interview data because they are like natural language rather than quantitative information. So you can see that for different purpose, we may want to do different research to understand the user's need or the stakeholders' need. But there's like when you are doing this kind of elicitation, to do this kind of research, we try to be open-minded. So no matter we are doing surveys or interviews or focus group, we always try to be open-minded. right? So we normally, when we are given a problem by the clients, we may have some of our own understanding of the problem. So sometimes we will have some ideas in our mind already, like how to solve it, like what is the problem. However, when we talk with stakeholders, we need to be as open-minded as possible. Try not to ask questions like, do you think having this, do you think we should have this feature? Like very specific, like for example, do you think we should have a feature that allow users to be able to edit their question? So these are some like pre-conceived ideas in your mind, like you can influence the answers by the participants. So we try to be as open-minded as we could. So we can ask questions instead, like, do you face any challenges while posting questions on the forum? Right. So these are more open-ended questions, and they may mention, like, I want to edit my question after I post that question. Right. So they may mention that. But when we are doing research with the participants, try to be open-minded as possible. Okay, cool. Yeah, because for iteration rate, we'll also do this kind of user research, like interview or survey potential participants. So let's do some activities here today so that I can provide some feedback so you know what you need to pay attention to. Okay, so what about now we are designing an app for timetable, like a timetabling app for UNSW student. And now you are doing user study with stakeholders. Can you put in the chat who you want to interview and what kind of question you want to ask? Right, like we are now designing a timetabling app for UNSW student. Can you put in the chat who do you want to interview and what kind of interview questions you want to have? Yeah, so I think the first step is we need to identify the stakeholders, like who are the stakeholders? Right, so the stakeholders may be UNSW students, right? The teaching staff, right? The IT staff. Who else? The admin staff. Right? So they are all stakeholders of this timetabling app, right? Yeah, people at uni, I want to interview students. Yeah, they are all really great. And then for each of group of people, you may design different kind of questions. So for example, the questions that you design for students may be different from the question you design for the IT staff, right? So what kind of question you want to ask? Yeah, well, you are writing in the chat about the questions. I'll provide some feedback on the stakeholders. There are some very good ones, like interview the students, interview the teachers. So these are all pretty great. And Carl mentioned like maybe random people, so it's not biased. This is a very good point. Like we try not to be biased, because if you only interview people in a specific course or in a specific year or at a specific degree, the information may be biased. So you want to have a group of people that have different backgrounds or like different demographics. However, we need, like when we write, when we prepare for elicitation, prepare this kind of user research, we try to be very clear about their persona. Like when you say random people, like random of what kind of people, like random admin people. So we still need to be very clear of the type of the stakeholders, because they may have different needs, they may have different kind of requirements. We may also want to ask different questions for different group of peoples. Right. Yeah, Thomas also raised a very good point. Like the person responsible for the financial support of the project. Wow, this is also a very good point. Like we want to ask them as well. And this is also a very specific example. Yeah, Carl asked like, what is persona? Yeah. So in this course, in 1531, we won't go very deep into that, but persona is a very important concept in requirement engineering, or more like UI, UX research. So persona is a specific type of people. So you describe a group of people that who will use your software, like stakeholders. So for example, we may have persona A, we name it as Max, and Max is a first year computer science student who is taking 1531, right? So this is persona. So we may have different personas. Yeah, so Thomas put in the chat some example questions like what features would make the timetabling application useful? Yeah, that's a good question. What sort of things would make the application more useful and more pleasant to use than pre-existing applications? Yeah, so these are very good interview questions. But if I were you, I will ask like easier to answer questions. Like for example, your second question, what sort of things would make the application more useful and more pleasant to use than pre-existing applications? So this can be a pretty hard to answer kind of question for the participants. So we can make it easier to answer. Like we can ask first, are you using any timetabling app at the moment? The first question. If they answer yes, and then we can ask like what are they, and then you can, after you say like timetabling app A, and then you can ask, do you think they are good? Do you face any challenges while using the application? Right? So then you can understand what are the problems that they are facing using current existing apps. Right? So rather than asking questions about what kind of features you want to see, this can be a very hard to answer questions for the participants. And very often they don't know what they want to have. Like they don't know what kind of features they want to have. But they should know what kind of challenges they are facing. Right? They may say, well, this app is not good enough because of A, B, C, D, E. So then you know A, B, C, D, E is the problem that you can solve. Right? And then you can do some brainstorming, you can do some research on how to solve like problem A, B, C, D, E. Yeah, like Princess also says, like it's too much thinking for the person to do. That's right. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Like when we do the interviews or survey, it's better to focus more on the problem rather than on the solution, right? So that because the stakeholder, they may not know the solution, but they should know the problem, right? Cool. Any other from the chat? Like if you can put your question in the chat, then I can provide some feedback. Yeah, so you may notice that doing such kind of requirement engineering or elicitation is not very easy. Like for a couple of reasons. Like the first one would be like stakeholders normally they don't know what they really want, right? So this is really hard. Like they don't know what they really want. So we need to be very careful when we ask questions. And sometimes another challenge we may face is that stakeholders will express requirements in their own like terminologies. So like UNSW timetabling app, so this is all good because we are all UNSW students or staff. So we know the environment, like we know the terminologies that we normally use as UNSW, like my UNSW or some terminology we use here. But if we are designing some software for other domains, like for example, the medical system, right? So there may be some terminologies that we have no idea. So sometimes it can be very challenging for us to do, and then we'll need to do some research, and maybe we can ask them like, what are they, right? And another challenge that you may also be facing while you are doing iteration array is that different stakeholders, they may have conflicting requirements. Right. So for example, a very common scenario is you ask participant A and they will say, wow, this feature is so hard to use. Another participant B will say, oh, I love this feature so much. Right. So this is also very common. The solution for us to do is normally we won't just ask 2 participants, right? So you will ask at least this way. And in real scenario, ask a lot more. So if we are doing interviews, we may ask 10, 20, or even 30. So you may prioritize, right? So prioritize which problem you want to solve, or based on like the percentage of people having the problem or having this challenge. Right. So we may also prioritize based on like the market need, or prioritize based on like how easy it is to implement that feature, like the cost, right? Another challenge or problem while you are doing requirement analysis may be like the requirement changes during the analysis process. Like new stakeholders may emerge and the business environment may change. So as a fun example, okay. Like AI is really emerging so fast nowadays. However, we don't have AI so powerful before. So for some applications, they may not considering having AI in their application. But with new technology involved, the stakeholders may ask for new requirements. So we need to update the requirement document. We may also need to update our system as well. So these are all some potential challenges we will face in our major project or in industry environment. Okay, cool. Any questions so far about elicitation? All good? Okay, if you have any question, put in the chat. Then let's move on to the next step, analysis. So after we do the user research, after we interview the stakeholders, we send out surveys, we collected all the data, we also did some market research or other kind of research, and then we'll have a lot of data. So this kind of data will include, for example, the transcript from the interviews, may also include the answers to the survey questions, may also include the data we collected from market research. So these are all data that we collected from the previous step, which is the elicitation. So the next step will be analysis. So we now need to analyze those data. Right. So the analysis will include like identify the dependencies, the conflicts, and the risks. So we will, for example, we may identify what are the very common challenges for the stakeholders. Like it's so hard to draft a question on the forum. It's hard to describe what I need to solve. Right. So this may be some common problems. We may also identify some conflicts, right? Conflicts between, for example, the timetabling app example. The conflicts can be the needs from the students and the need from the IT staff. So there may be some conflicts. We may also identify some risks, Right, so what if the data in the timetabling app changes? Like what happens? How can we solve that? So these are all we can analyze from the data from step 1. And then the next step will be establish relative priorities. So we may identify a lot of things that need to be done, like requirements from all kinds of stakeholders. From our analysis, we need to prioritize like what to do first and what to do next. So the general way of prioritizing is we do the core feature first. So we solve the core problem first. So for example, if it is a forum, then the priorities will be allow users to ask questions and answer questions, right? So these are priorities. Some other requirements may be like added the post or a leaderboard or stuff, like other stuff. They may not be part of the priorities, right? Because it's a forum, so the priorities should be asking questions and answering questions. As for the other features, like when we analysis, we may build it on top of the user research, the market research, and then we prioritize other things, like what is more important for the stakeholders. And normally we can do through user stories and user cases to describe these kind of requirements. And I will try to cover both of them today. The next step will be specification, so refining the picture, so writing the stack, like writing the requirement documents. This is also where we break up the requirements into functional requirements and non-functional requirements, because we should have got both functional requirements and non-functional requirements from step 1 and 2, and then we need to break them up here in step 3, like what are the functional requirements and what are the non-functional requirements. We may also need to group them. So for example, there are a couple of requirements that is related to asking questions on the forum. There's another group of requirements that is related to answering questions, another group of features relating to other stuff, right? So this is where we write the spec, and there's no perfect way to do this. We just try to be as specific as possible. We try to be as clear as possible. And you may still feel not very confident about your requirement document. So this is very, very okay, and it's also very common. So what is the solution to that? So how can we solve that? Is we go back to the stakeholders and we validate. So we validate with the stakeholders and to ensure the requirements are correct. So this is also very common. Because even though we'll do the interview, we'll do the survey, we'll do the analysis, but sometimes we may have some misunderstanding of what the stakeholders want, and this is absolutely okay. So what we need to do is we summarize our what we analyzed, and we go back to them and ask them if this is what you mean, and is there anything missing? Do you want to add something? And this is called validation. Okay, so this is the 4 steps of doing requirement engineering. So we start with elicitation, analysis, specification, and then validation. So these are the 4 steps of doing requirement engineering. Cool. Okay, any questions so far? All good? Yep. Okay. If no question, let's take a break for 5 minutes and come back at 12 p.m. Okay, have a break. Welcome back, everyone. Very short break, right? About 4 or 5 minutes. Cool. So, in the previous lecture, we talked about the 4 steps of requirement engineering. So in iteration 3, you will do the 4 steps as well. So we'll start with elicitation, and then we'll do analysis and specification, and then validation as well. So the process described here is very similar to what we just discussed in the previous lecture. So you will be asked to do interviews with 2 to 3 people. I would recommend 3 people because if you interview 2 people, you may get like conflicting insights, and it's very hard for you to prioritize. But if you interview 3 people, and it will be easier for you. But in like real cases, like real industry cases, we'll need to interview 10 or 20 or even 30 people. But this is just for you as a practice. Another thing is, in the example that we mentioned, they were mainly about before we start designing or developing an application. However, in software development life cycle, it is like iterative. So we may start with requirement analysis, and then we'll design and then we'll go back to requirement engineering. So this is like an iterative process. So now for iteration 3, you may already have like a working version of Tahook, but we will always want to improve it, like make it better. So we will again like come back to the users and asking them like how do they feel about current version of Tahoot to hack. And what can be improved? Do you feel any challenges of using the current version? And then we'll do elicitation and then requirement engineering, and then we go back. So this is an iterative process in the software engineering development lifecycle. So we'll always do that. In real cases, like in real agile development environment, the requirement analysis is always going on. So we may design or develop a very small feature, and then we'll go to the user and ask for feedback. We'll always do like fine tuning. We'll always be tuning the features, right? So requirement engineering in reality is happening all the time. It's not just before design or after maintenance. It's happening all the time. So in real agile world. Okay. So this is about elicitation. We also, elicitation. So for analysis and specification, like how do we analysis and document the requirement, we'll use user stories and user cases. So this will be the second lecture that we'll do today, and then you will know that after today about the use cases here. Validation. So in this course, the validation will only ask you to go back to the original 2 to 3 people and ask them to confirm, to validate your understanding, and then ask for further comments and record their comments. So this is what very simple, very basic validation. In real world, like in industry, validation can be more than this. So validation will again include this, go back to the stakeholders. But the way we go back to stakeholders will not just be asking them, well, is this what you need? Is this what you want? But it will more we design a prototype and we show this prototype to the stakeholders and ask them to validate. So the prototype doesn't need to have any code. So you do not need to implement that, develop that, the whole thing, and then go back to the stakeholders and asking them, is this what you meant? That will be very, very time consuming. We want to be really fast, like we want to iterate really fast. So the prototype can be, maybe we just have a piece of paper. We have a piece of paper and we bring a pen and draw on here. So maybe we draw an interface, like here's the button, here's the submit a question, here's editing the question, here's submitting the answer. And we ask them to validate, is this what they meant? And asking them to comment on it. So this is a very basic prototype. So this is called low fidelity prototype. But there's also high fidelity prototype. Prototype. So examples of prototype may be something like this. So you may draw an interface, and here's the button. You may want to have some text here, maybe submit a question. And if the user like pretending clicking on here, and this will be the next page shown here. Other examples may be this one, like click here and then go to here, click. So these are all prototypes, and you do not need to actually code anything. You just show an idea, like a conceptual idea, and then validate the idea with the stakeholders. So yeah, so this is in real world, like how validation works. Yep. If you are interested in learning more about prototyping, you can look at this one, Figma. So Figma is a very powerful tool that can help you build prototypes really fast. It has a lot of resources here, but it's not covered in 1531. So if you are interested in prototyping or design, there's a course called HCI course, the one about human-computer interaction design. So that course will teach how you can build Figmas. So this is the phase before you actually implementing anything or coding anything. Okay. Yeah, oh, okay, we got some question about Figma. So Figma is an online application that you can build the interface or design the system by, it looks very similar to PowerPoint slides. Like you can put a block here, you can add a button here, you can add a figure here, you can change the text here, and but it's more interactive. So after you design the Figma prototype, after you click on, for example, after you click on here, it will move to another page. You click on here, you can move to another page. So it's clickable, it's interactive prototype, but you do not need to code anything. I'll see if there's an example that I can show. I don't think they have an example here. Yeah, but you can explore Figma at your own time. I'll put that in the chat. Yeah, it's not required for 1531 iteration straight. I just want to mention like how validation works in real industry, in real life. So validation is more than just come back to the original people that you interviewed. So it's more than that. But in this course, because it's a software engineering fundamentals course, so we only do the very basic of validation. Okay. Cool. So now let's talk about here. So we haven't talked about this part yet. So use cases and user stories. use cases and user stories, they are both ways to describe how users interact with the system. Right. So software design or design in general, we need to have users in the center. So we need to put user at the center of the design, because we want to design a system that to be used by users, right? So we want to try to avoid that we design a system that looks perfect to us developers, but it's not very usable for the users. So we want to put the user at the center of any system design. Okay. Yeah. So user stories and use cases are both ways to describe how users interact with the system, but they are also different in like their format, their level of detail, and also their purpose. We'll talk about them one by one. So we'll start with user stories. So user stories are a method of requirement engineering used to inform the development process and what features to build with the user at the center. Okay, so remembering that analysis and specification happens after the elicitation. So user story is part of the specification. So after we do the interviews, after we analyze the data, and then we do the specification, right? So user story is part of the specification. So after we have done the interview, we have analyzed the data, now we need to document. We need to document what we have found in the interviews and we have found in the analysis. We need to document that. And the way we document that is we put the user at the center and describe what the user can do with the system. Okay, so put the user at the center, describe what the user can do with the system. So the structure, like how we document that, like how do we document the finding from the elicitation and analysis, is we write the user stories in the format of, as a specific type of user, I want to do something so that for some reason. Right, so this is the structure of user stories. So you can think of that as the syntax of user stories. So for example, a student can purchase monthly parking passes online. So this is what the students say, but your user stories will need to become, as a student, I want to purchase a parking pass so that I can drive to school. So it includes the type of the stakeholder, the user type, and what they can do rather than what the system can do, right? So you can see here, we put the user at the center and describe it as what the user can do and what a specific type of user can do. And why do they want to do that? Like they want to purchase parking pass because they want to drive to school. Right, so you can see that here we need to first identify what is the type of the user for this user story. So for example, going back to our example about the USW timetabling app. So for different users, what they want to do may be different. So for example, as a USW student, I want to be able to view my timetabling for term 24 terms, right? So that I can know when should I go to which class at which lecture theater, right? But as IT management people, I want to be able to manage blah 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 so that I can blah blah. So you can see that the user story for different type of people can be very different. So for different group of users for the system. So we need to be very clear first. What is the user type, right? So here as a student, right? That is what they want to do. So why do we include this part, like so that I can drive to school? So why do we include the reason here? This is because we want all the people on the team understand why do we need to implement this for the system, right? So we have a very clear objective in our mind. So user stories are used by the whole team. Like it's used by stakeholders, it's used by developers, used by the user stories to be used by developers, the design team, the clients, the business owner, the users, by everyone on the team, like all stakeholders. Right. So the user story may be used by the clients to verify, to validate, well, is this what I really want? Is it the proper way to communicate what I need with the development team? Right. So it needs to be really easy to understand. There's nothing about like technical details here. So anyone should be able to understand the user stories. The development team may use the user stories as like this is something that I want to implement this week. For this week, I'm going to implement to achieve this objective so that students can purchase a parking pass so that they can drive to school. Right. So the user stories is something that is shared among the whole team, like all stakeholders, like developers, designers, clients, users, everyone. Okay, so here are some attributes that summarize what I just mentioned about user stories. So the user stories are written in non-technical language. It should be understandable by anyone, not just the developers. And it focuses on keeping the customer at the core of the experience. Like we need to design user-centered system, right? The system should be able to easy to use for the customer. So we keep the customer at the core of the experience. It's also goal focused, like what is the goal, what is the objective, rather than the feature focused, right? It didn't say, well, what was the example? So it didn't say like when the user click on the button here, they can purchase a parking ticket, right? So that is the feature, that is the function that system can do. However, here we do not want to have any like feature focused component in the user stories, but just stop at the objective, like the purpose. Yeah, so user stories describe problems rather than solutions. If you found that your user stories include any solution, it means that you need to revise that. Right? It shouldn't include any solution in that. Okay. Why? Like you may be wondering why? Like why should I have this kind of user story that only have problem rather than solutions? Right. The reason is because user story. So when we design or develop any software systems, we need to start with the problem. We need to understand what the problem that we need to solve for the users with our system. The solutions can like have many, so there can be many different ways of solving the same problem. Right? But the problem is the one that we need to be solved. But solutions can be very different. Yeah. And it's also like user stories is a starting point for conversation and further clarification. So it's very high level. It doesn't have any like specific flow steps or interface or whatever, but it's very high level. It's for communication between among the whole team. So between the end users, the client, the developer. So it's very high level. It's just for communication among the whole team. So this is the purpose of a user story. It's not for solution. It's only for describe the problem to make sure that whole team understand the problem very clearly. Okay, so let's do some activities in the chat so that again I can provide feedback. So you know when you need to pay attention to while you are writing user stories. So let's try this one. Let's write some user stories for a to-do list. Okay, put in the chat user story for to-do list. I will go to here so you can see the structure of a user story. So when you're writing a user story, you need to start with a type of user, right? Start as I want to do what and so that. Put in the chat. Yeah, put in the chat a user story for a to-do list. Ozzy said that I am a student and I want to plan out what lab assignment I have to do. This is a very good starting point. But remembering that we need to follow this structure. So you may want to reframe that as a student, I want to plan out what lab assignment I have to do so that I won't miss the deadline. Right, remembering that we need to follow the structure. Kevin said, as a student, I want check boxes so that I can view what tasks I have completed. This is good, but can be improved. So when we write user story, we try to avoid any solution or any features in it. So checkboxes can maybe it's about more like features, right? We want to have a checkbox, so it's a feature. So perhaps I will refine that as a student, I want to strike through the finished items so that I can view what task I have completed. Right, rather than say like having a checkbox. So Thomas said that as a teacher, I want to be able to distribute a list of tasks so that can be incorporated into student lists. Wow, this is a good one. Carl said that as a student, I want to see a list of accomplishments so that I'm motivated to keep on going. Yeah, this is also a very good one. Like follow the structure, it's user-centered, and there's only goals, purpose without any feature or solution. Good one. Yeah, in order to aid students keeping track. Yeah, well, Thomas added that. Yeah, so pretty good. Yeah, so the key point is follow the structure, goal-oriented rather than having any feature in that. Add so that like what is the reason of having this user story. Yeah, good. Cool. So this is about user story. If you come up with other ones, feel free to put in the chat and I will provide feedback. Okay. Yeah, so if we want to write good user stories, it need to be independent. It means that a single user story can be developed or delivered independently. Why is that? Like, why do we want to have user stories like that? The reason is because in an agile environment, user story is something that we it's like a milestone in a sprint or in a stage. So for example, you may use a user story as the milestone for your week, right? So you can say, well, this is the milestone, like this is the user story that I want to accomplish, I want to finish by end of this week, right? So you don't want that to be dependent on another user story, right? Because it makes things very complicated. So we want that to be independent and also negotiable. Like we will also want to avoid too much detail. So it's very high level. It's also goal oriented. It just say that what the specific type of user want to achieve for what specific reason, rather than having too much detail, because the solution can be very different, right? The way of achieving the same objective can be very different. But as long as our solution, our implementation, our design can achieve that goal, it should be okay, right? Like we achieved the user's need. It also needs to be estimatable. The reason that we want it to be estimatable is because we want to know like whether we set the milestone properly. Is it something that we can finish by end of this week, right? It also needs to be small. So user story should be small. If it's too large, like in agile environment, we want to do things fast and iterative. We want to finish one fast and get feedback and then improve or move on to the next one. So it needs to be as small as possible and also needs to be testable. The reason that we want them to be testable is because we want to know whether we have met that milestone, right? We say like we want to finish this user story by end of this week. So how do you know whether you have finished that or not, right? So it needs to be testable. We need a way to know that we have done this milestone. We have done this user story, right? So these are the features or good properties of user stories. So when you write a good user story, you can also go through these properties. And the ones in the chat, actually, they are all pretty good ones. Like, for example, a call said, as a student, I want to see a list of accomplishments so that I am motivated to keep going. So it's independent, right? So it doesn't depend on anything. It's also negotiable. So it doesn't matter like how you listed accomplishment, right? Just I want to see a list of accomplishment. It's also valuable. It's valuable to the user because the user are motivated to keep going on because they see a list of accomplishments, right? It's also estimatable. So you know how long roughly you can finish listing all the accomplishments. It's also not too big, it's small, and it's also testable. It's list all the accomplishments and then it's listed all the accomplishments, right? Okay, so if you want to know more about user stories, this is a very good one from Avalanche. Okay, it's okay. I'll quickly show you here, but you can read that after the lecture yourself. So here's the summary. I think it's also pretty good. So user story is an informal, general explanation of a software feature written from the perspective of the end user. Its purpose is to articulate how a software feature will provide value to the customer. And you can also see here like a key component of agile software development is putting people first. And user story put end users at the center of the conversation. And they use non-technical languages. And the team should also know why they are building what they are building and what value it creates. Okay, so this is a very high-level summarization, but you can read through it at your own time, but it's not required reading. It's just optional. Okay, so this is so by now we've talked about what is a user story and how to write good user stories. So now we'll move on to talk about how we can test whether a user story has been satisfied. Here's a typo, sorry, I will fix that. So the way that we can test whether a user story can be testified is by writing the user acceptance criteria. So we can break down a user story into criteria that must be met for the user or customer to accept. And it's same also written in natural language because the user acceptance criteria should also be understandable by everyone on the team, like including the end users, the clients, and also the development team. And they should also be able to refine before implementation. So here's an example. As a user, I want to use a search field to tap a city, name, or street so that I can find matching hotel options. Okay, so the user acceptance criteria here can be the search field is placed on the top bar. Search starts once the user clicks search. The field contains a placeholder with a gray-colored text saying, "Where are you going?" The placeholder disappears once the user starts typing. Search is performed if a user taps in a city, hotel name, street, or all combined. The user can't type more than 200 symbols. So you can see that this is the user acceptance criteria. It should also be written with the stakeholders, reviewed by the stakeholders. It's written in natural language. It's also pretty easy to understand, and it's measurable, right? So you know whether you have met all these criteria. And you can also change that before implementation, right? So maybe you want to change here from 200 symbols to 100 symbols. It's changeable. Yeah, so the user acceptance criteria should also be collaboratively defined with the stakeholders. And here's another example. As a user, I can log in through a social media account because I always forget my passwords. And the user acceptance criteria here, mainly specifically for this part, is they can log in through Facebook, they can log in through LinkedIn, and they can log in through Twitter. Right? So this is not a complete user acceptance criteria for the whole user story, but this example is for the social media account part. So you can see that it's very helpful to have the user acceptance criteria, because if we define this properly before implementation, so developers can have a very clear understanding in their mind, like which one I should have. Should I just have Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter, or should I also have other ones like Google, like Microsoft, or whatever, right? So this is, you can see that it is also very useful to define those user acceptance criteria before implementation. Right? It's also a good way of communicating or discussing with the stakeholders. You can ask questions like, is this what you want? Is it too many? Is it, do you want to add more? Right, so it's a good media for communication with the stakeholders. So there are some general, so how to write user acceptance criteria. The first one, this is so tricky. Sometimes I feel really hard to explain this one. Like, acceptance criteria should not be too broad, but shouldn't be too narrow. So, how to find like whether it's too broad or too narrow? So you can think from the perspective of a developer. If it's too broad, you may find it's really ambiguous, like how should we implement that? So for example, here, the search field is placed on the top bar. So this is pretty specific. So it's on the top bar. So if we don't have this one, as a developer, you may be wondering, where should I put the search field? Like, is it okay to put on the top bar or on the set bar? So it's like pretty ambiguous, but it's also not too narrow, right? It's not say, well, you should stay at very middle of the top bar or whatever, right? So it's not too broad, too narrow, but it's really hard to judge like whether it's too broad, too narrow. Minimize technical details. The reason is that we want to discuss the user acceptance criteria with all the stakeholders. You want to make sure that the clients are still need to able to understand them. Well, they can be updated during development. They should first be written before it starts. So it's very similar to writing tests before implementation. So this is the same. Like, we need to know the testing criteria basically before we're actually implementing anything. Acceptance tests are tests that are performed to ensure acceptance criteria have met. So when you say like, I want to finish this user story by end of this week, so then at the end of this week you can go through the acceptance test and see whether you have achieved all of them, right? So now our acceptance criteria can easily be mapped to automated acceptance tests. Sometimes we need to set up user acceptance testing environment for real user to manually use it and provide feedback. Well, this is so important and also so common. User testing is not covered that much in this course in 1531, but in real world, in real industry scenarios, user testing is very important. Not everything can be tested using like unit testing or the tab like being tab safe or pass all the unit testing is not enough. In many cases, we need to showcase our finished features to the users and ask the users to try to use it and then provide feedback. So user testing is very, very important. Acceptance tests, they are also black box tests, means that for example, when we have a user to do user testing, right? So they do not need to look at our code. They do not need to look at how the functions are implemented. They just need to view the system as a black box and just try to use it. So acceptance tests are also black box tests. Any questions so far? Put in the chat if you have any questions. Yeah, there's no coding or like technical, very, very technical parts in the lecture today. While I was teaching higher level software engineering courses, like the second year and third year workshops, I noticed that majority of our students, they really enjoy doing coding, programming, but sometimes they want to ignore or they don't see it is very important to do requirement engineering. This is also true in industry, like requirement engineering can sometimes be but not seen as that important. However, this is very, very, very important. Like while I was taking my honors thesis students, I always push them to do requirement engineering properly. The reason is because we want to be very clear, like what we want to achieve by the end of the development. So we want to be very clear what our system need to achieve, and we also need to make sure that we are doing something that can provide value to the users. Otherwise, like if we are just jump to the solution too fast before really understand the problem, we may design or develop something that doesn't bring value to the user. So that will be a waste of time, money, or your passion as well. So you spend a lot of effort doing coding, programming, but at the end you find out, well, this is a very good work as a programmer, but may not be a very good results as a software developer, because you need to solve something for the users as a software developer. So we are no longer just a programmer. We are now software developer. So we need to develop something that bringing value to the user. So this is why requirement engineering is so important. So we need to understand what the users need, right? Okay, so there's also an alternative. So this is rule-based. This is called rule-based acceptance criteria. So there are some rules that we need to follow, but there's also another way of writing acceptance criteria, and that is called scenario-oriented. So scenario-oriented acceptance criteria are structured in the way of like given some precondition. When I do some action, then I expect some results. This is like scenario-oriented. For example, here this one. As a user, I want to be able to recover the password to my account so that I will be able to access my account in case I forgot the password. And the user acceptance criteria will become, the name of the scenario is called forget password. And given that the user has navigated to the login page, when the user selected forget password option and enter a valid email to receive a link for password recovery. Then the system send the link to the enter the email given. So you can see that it describes the acceptance criteria as a scenario, like what happens with what kind of precondition, then what happens now, and then what action that the user take. Yeah. Okay, so this is called scenario-based acceptance criteria. So both are valid. You can choose whichever you want to use. However, there are some general guidance on choosing which one to use. So rule-based acceptance criteria are normally simpler. Just bullet points like the first rule, the second rule, the third rule. However, scenario-based work for stories that imply specific user actions. If you want to emphasize like specific user action, like what actions user take and then what happens, then maybe you can use scenario-based acceptance criteria. Next one is called, so we now have talked about the user stories. So for iteration 3, we'll need to write at least 3 user stories, and then we'll also need to write 1 use cases. Okay, so what is use cases? So both user stories and use cases, they are ways of describe how users interact with the system. However, user story, you can see that it's more higher level. Right, it put the user at the center and say, as the specific type user, I can do that because of that, right? But for use cases, is more detailed. It has a lot more details, more than just 1 sentence for a specific case. And the purpose is also different. Like user stories purpose is for communication among the whole team with all the stakeholders and developers. But use cases is more typically for in-depth system requirement and gathering. It's mainly used for developers and also the quality assurance team. So it provides a picture for functional requirements and also used in more used in traditional project approaches rather than agile. So user stories is more popular in agile environment, but use cases is more popular in traditional project management approaches, and it has more details. So let me show you some examples so you know what use cases look like, and then you can see the difference. Let me find you an example. Okay, here's one. Ooh, sorry. So here's an example of user story. So this is a user story, right? So it's very short, it's very high level. But for use cases, it looks like this. So this is an example of use cases. So you can see that it has much more information, much more details. It is also more structured. It starts with a name of this use case, and it also has a summary of this use case. So this use case is mainly for example, where we are writing a document, we found that we read one letter wrong, we want to capitalize one specific letter in a specific word, and then how should we do that? So the summary of it is all occurrence of a search term are replaced with a replacement text, and then the rationale, why do we want to do this? Because sometimes we want to edit that, we want to do search and replace function, and the users will be all users, everyone using the document. The precondition will be all document is loaded and being edited. And there are some steps in this use case. It starts with the user indicates that the software is to perform a search and replace in the document, and then the software responds by requesting the search term, and then and then the user do what and the software do what. So the interaction between the user and the system. So in user story, just the user, but in use cases, they are both user and the system. Cool. And there may be some alternative paths. So for example, normally in step 3, this is what was happening. However, there may be some alternatives. So maybe and maybe there are also some post conditions. So in this example, you can see use cases are much more detailed than user stories, right? So this is the user story and this is the use cases. It has much more details and it describes not only what the users want to do, but also include the interaction between the user and the system. You can see that the user initiate actions and the system responds with reactions. They consider the system as black box and are only focused on high-level understanding of the flow. And there are two ways of presenting use cases. One is in the written form, like I just showed you, but there's also another way of visually showcasing use cases. Right. So here's an example of visually showcasing use cases as like use case diagrams. And the step starts from the first one. The system, like the ATM machine, says that enter your PIN, and then the user typing in PIN number. And then the system verify account XYZ, and then send the request to the server, and the server said like XYZ is valid and their balance is $100. And then the system said like, how may I help you? And the user says that withdraw $60, and then please take out cash, collecting cash, and then the ATM machine go back to the server. Okay, so this is an example of use case diagrams. So use case can be presented in two different ways, either in diagrams or in this kind of written text. Any question about use cases? Remembering that we also need to have a use case in iteration 3. So if you have any question, please feel free to put in the chat, or if you want to have a draft version in the chat, I can also provide feedback. Withdraw $60, yeah. So if you want to write your use cases in written format, you can try to follow this template. So you start with the name of the use case and the goal in context. So for example, the use case here may be withdraw money using an ATM machine, and the goal will be I want to withdraw some money and check my balance. And then we may also have a scope here. So remembering that you do not need to have all of this while you are writing use cases. So this is just an example. You can have your own structure. But the most important part is the steps here. So we need to make sure that we have those steps. But you can see that in this example, the structure includes the name of the precondition, success and condition, field indication, primary actor, and trigger. But in my other example, it's different, right? Start with the name, the summary, rationale, user, precondition, basic course of events, alternative paths is also different. Okay, so you can also define your own structure. But this is the most important part, like how the user interact with the system. Okay, yeah, so we also provided a lot of further ratings. So you can find all of them in the slide. They are optional ratings. They are not required, but if you want to know more about user stories or use cases, please have a look at them. Otherwise, that's all of today. Yeah, I was reading the chat. Yeah, so because we are now in iteration 3, there are a lot of roles that are dependent on each other. So we will see that your roles may depend on your team members' roles or their others functions. So it's very common that we will have some merge conflicts or things. It's also part of your learning process. This is how real life software development looks like. So it's a good learning experience or opportunity. However, if you need any support for group work or teamwork, if you need any kind of support like this, please feel free to let your tutor, your project tutor know. Like if you need support for your group work, you need support for your teamwork. You can also email the course account or ask on the forum if you need support for your group, need support for your teamwork. We are here to support you. The only way that we can support your group or teamwork is you let us know that you need support. Okay, so please feel free to ask on the forum or ask your project tutor if you need support with your group work or teamwork, and we'll do our best to support you. Okay. Yep. Another recommendation is because we are now marking iteration 2, we heard some feedback from our tutors is we found that groups who set internal deadlines earlier in general performs better than groups who set internal deadlines very close to the official deadline. Because if you set your internal deadlines earlier, if some of you haven't done the work as a satisfied quality, the other team members can still help on that or make sure that we leave enough time to make it ready for the official submission. So the recommendation is to set your internal deadline earlier. Yeah, talking about support for group work, like we mainly mean support for teamwork rather than writing the functions or the project. So if you need any support for teamwork, for group work, let us know. I will also recommend you review the teamwork lecture recording. There are some very good suggestions in that. Otherwise, that's all for today. Good luck for your iteration 3. Let us know if you need help with anything. And next lecture we'll talk about conceptual modeling, and after that we will have covered everything for iteration 3. We will have a dedicated lecture next week, next Tuesday, talking about iteration 3. So that will be in next week. But this week, the main focus is to make sure that you have learned everything for your iteration 3. Okay, thank you everyone. See you on Thursday. Bye. Bye-bye.